You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome to Music Tectonics, the podcast that traces the lines and collisions where tech and music meet. I'm your host for today, Tristra Newyear Yeager, Director of Strategy at Rock Paper Scissors, the music tech PR firm. Today we're speaking with Dr. Mike Butera, founder and CEO of Artiphon. Mike has an impressive background as both a scholar, he holds a PhD in philosophy and sound studies, and as an entrepreneur with a keen knack for design. Artiphon is guided by Mike's musical and design experience in its mission to create new ways of making music, both through innovative instruments and delightfully playful apps and screen-based experiences. Artiphon has worked with major social media players like Snap to build really cool things, and we can talk about that in just a second here, and has dedicated part of the company to reaching young, often underserved musical creators around the US. Behind it all is an extraordinary thoughtful approach to what makes us musical animals and sonic creators, and to what the future might hold for music-making technologies and practices. Thanks so much for joining me today, Mike.
Hey, it's great to be here. Hi, Tristra.
Well, first, before we got too deep into some of the more exciting outer realms of music making, audio creation, etc., let's talk a little bit about Artiphon. Can you explain in a nutshell what Artiphon does for listeners that may not know what you're up to?
Yeah, sure. We do a few things, but really our focus is around designing interactive musical experiences and focusing on how people can kind of touch sound in new ways. Historically, that meant instruments, and we think very broadly about what instruments or interfaces can be. Our market and our focus is really on this kind of broad cultural shift toward casual creativity and fun ways to play with music. Rather than, say, a traditional kind of instrument company, we're much more focused on that kind of everyday playfulness around music. So that's the nutshell. I'm sure we'll get into it a bit more.
Cool. So you've already hinted at what I wanted to ask you first, which was if we strip away all the cultural trappings and get really basic about it, what elements determine the way we make music? What have you discovered is essential to that sort of casual creativity that you're hoping to encourage through Artiphon?
Yeah, good question. Traditionally, instruments resonated to make sound, and now that it's digital, or we have the opportunity to play with digital music, we can make any sound. And it's there's a bit of an overabundance issue that we have to deal with there. So the big question is, how do you want to play the sound? And so there are a lot of traditional ways to do that. And we actually started with designing an instrument called the Instrument One, which is really about merging or hybridizing these traditional instrument forms into a single kind of universal interface. That design principle was great, and people love it. And I think it actually gets to some of that sort of cultural thing you're trying to strip away in your question. But I think we have to grapple with that, because music isn't just something that we're making every minute. It's something that does tie in this whole history of internalized cultural associations. So the way we look at this, just to break it down a bit, is music is this multi-sensory experience that isn't just about sound. It's really, in addition to the auditory, it's visual and spatial, it's tactile. Whether you're listening or creating music, there are these embodied elements to it. And it's social. And, that could be you playing with people or even just playing alone. You're going to have ways that you're referencing or even hypothetically thinking of music as something that you could be social with. So I don't actually think we can strip away all the cultural trappings. In fact, I think it's key to figuring out why we make music, what drives us, what motivates us. And we're really focused on bringing back in some of those elements of intention and motivation into the process and the design of musical experiences. So I feel like I flipped your question around there, but I'm happy to go deeper if you want.
Yeah, no, let's talk a bit about the intention and motivation. How do you explore that as you're considering, what products to offer somebody who may be a trained musician or may be very untrained in making music?
Yeah. So we think about the music creation process as a kind of signal chain, kind of like a traditional recording studio, by analogy, where, the intention or the motivation is a first step, but then you have the interface, the thing that you play, the technology. You have to learn how to do that. You have to articulate or play it through a technique. You have to translate it, like recording, or microphones, preamps, converters, all kinds of stuff. You have to produce it. You have to mix it, edit, add effects. You have to distribute it by sharing and even collecting and streaming, which then you're consuming again. And then that leads back to the intention or the motivation. And this, what I just described, is actually more of a circle than a line or a cycle. If we're going to look at what the musical intention is, it's probably going to reference that whole signal chain. And what tends to happen is that most people get lost in that. And they say, well, I have no clue even what Mike just said. And so I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to leave that to the pros and the people who know what they're doing, the people who are good at it or have some innate musical skill or something. And so most people just say they can't do it. And so what we're focused on is really acknowledging that whole signal chain has to happen. All those steps are necessary, but they don't all have to be hard. And some of them are really based on historical technologies of making music, like physical instruments and like 20th century recording technologies that we can automate now. And so the question of distilling and bringing music to more people, I do think we have to embrace automation, which we see as a form of augmentation. But I mean, recorded music and synthesizers were both banned by the American Federation of Musicians in the 20th century. So when new things are introduced, it's scary, and we love that that kind of tension, because it's what creates new opportunities for people.
And in some ways, if we accept automation, what we're saying is that we're not saying that, how should I put this? We're not saying that okay, let me try this again. We are very hung up, I think, as a legacy of the 19th century idealization of the artist as like lone genius.
Yes.
And that really hamstrings us from sharing creativity with more people who might benefit from it, because music is always a collective endeavor. Even if you are sitting alone putting notes on a manuscript in your garret somewhere, in that sort of idealized way, you're still drawing on a collective information and accumulated experience that has been channeled through you. So automation,
classical composers were remixing.
Oh, absolutely.
Nonstop, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They had to. I mean, they had to produce so much content for, to put a totally anachronistic and, awful word on it. They had to play with what their patrons wanted, or they had to get something ready for that opera that they had to, God.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Such pressure.
Yeah. It's high stakes, right? So in some ways, automation is merely a new, technologically mediated way for us to channel that collective creativity that we've accumulated as a species.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think even Western musical notation, it's a technology. It's a form of, you could argue, automating the transmission of the musical idea, and it's a technology that is difficult. Reading music is a challenging thing, and there are many ways to do it, and a few have been invented in the meantime as well. But I think getting back a minute to what you were saying, and these ideals. I mean, I know this is problematic to say, but I do believe it. The idea of musical mastery and even musical training in a sort of single ambition path, I think is really problematic, and it's related to these Western notions, like the sort of Hegelian cultural superiority and even cultural colonialism that are obviously problematic. I'm not saying that musical ambitions are wrong. I think they're wonderful, and virtuosity is great too. But it's so particular to the player, the instrument, the audience, the time, and again, for most people, that idea of mastery and that requirement of training is actually just keeping them from enjoying musical play in a simpler way, and in a way that what humans used to have access to. We didn't have as many kind of ideals getting in the way of just joining in. So I think it's mostly nostalgia. The holding up these ideals as sacred is mostly this sort of nostalgic, generations old kind of thing. It's fading away, and we have nothing against. I mean, I play violin. I love it, but nothing against the history. But it shouldn't determine the possibilities of the future.
So you mentioned, there being these multiple steps where people can kind of stumble if they don't feel that they're qualified or trained or able to engage in musical creation. How do you simplify those steps? How do you turn them into like little springboards instead of stumbling blocks?
Well, back to the inspiration and the intention of music making, I do think we always need something to reference as the creative act. And otherwise, you're just listening to music, and that's great too. But if we're talking about some form of musical creativity, there does have to be a gesture or, an event, a moment that you've decided, consciously or unconsciously. I mean, this can be just a flow state. You're caught up in the moment, but something that you said, okay, this is mine. This is what I did. This is what I added to it. And traditionally, if you think about even just a piano keyboard, that means choose the next note, choose which note it is, choose when it happens, how loud it is. If you're on another instrument that has different articulations, are you doing vibrato? Are you trilling it? There's all kinds of, articulations you can do. But most of the time, historically, you had to do all those things for every single note. And that's where the automation and augmentation comes back in. We can now program different musical styles and things that you choose. I mean, you're still choosing the whole deal, but you don't have to choose every single thing every single time. And every instrument does this to some degree as well. It's not like on a guitar that you're holding the string tension in tune the whole time. The tuner at the head of the guitar keeps it in tune.
That sounds horribly uncomfortable.
It's terrible. Yeah. I mean, I kind of want to play that instrument. It sounds like fun.
Yeah. It could be really interesting.
Yeah, but no, we rely on our instruments to automate certain things, and so if we take that further, then we can actually build in some of this music theory that's always going to be super challenging, but we can build it into the musical experiences and actually make them responsive to the player. And I think that probably gets straight to your question. What is the kind of next generation of these interactive music experiences? It's where they're smart enough to actually respond to people. And we have this crazy idea with Artiphon that we like to ignore the skill factor. And again, this is kind of a problematic thing to say, but we'll see what happens. if we design instruments that are really for beginners or pros or some person in the middle, we're right back to that mastery path. And instead, I'm very interested in what if we design in ways that ignore skill in favor of other principles, in favor of play, in favor of immediacy. And these are going to be limitations. We designed Orba, which is this handheld kind of circular instrument with 8 pads on top and a bunch of different gestural controls. But we designed it in a way that was really about immediate playability. And maybe you only have 60 seconds to be musical, in between calls or whatever. That's great. And do it and love it. And then turn it off and get back to work or whatever. It's not that music has to be this thing you can only do when you have, a whole Saturday night to dedicate to it. It can be in the nooks and crannies of your day. So that's kind of an inversion of the traditional, training and learning path.
Well, what it also does, and we have an Orba, and my 8-year-old instantly took it out and started doing all sorts of crazy things like an 8-year-old will do, like shaking it and making it make all sorts of interesting sounds, flipping it around and then cuddling with it and, manipulating it in ways that an adult might not have thought of. Yeah. But what it does in some ways is it liberates you from having to make something that's good or bad, right? Yes. You're simply just making things. And so that gets me to my next question, which is, what do you think making music does for people? You're dedicating your whole life to creating these entry points for people who are at different places or with different goals or different lives. What is the emotional, physical, or intellectual benefits you see flowing from this kind of casual music making that you want to empower people to do?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's there's a lot of new research coming out, and there has been for decades, about the benefits of music in all ages. It's one of the first social activities to emerge in children. Even newborns can detect beats and entrain to a rhythm, which is really cool. And one of the kind of mysteries of music still is that it's a coordinated activity across your whole brain. And it's unlike most other activities that are really localized to different parts of the brain. Music is activating all these different parts at once and actually getting parts of the brain to talk with each other that wouldn't do so if you're just writing or just taking a picture or just talking or something. And that's especially true when playing music. So any kind of interaction is just going to heighten that effect. And so a lot of studies are showing, obviously, for education, there's the traditional, like, if you play an instrument, you'll do better at math. That does seem to be true to some degree. And it really, for me, it's also more than just a neurological, it's also a psychological benefit of, accomplishment and creativity in a broad sense. But just, I think of it like it's a form of aesthetic control that people can have in their worlds. And even if you're just playing one note and you like it, and just that tone, go up to a keyboard, press one key. And if you like how that felt, even for a couple seconds, you're probably going to feel a little better. And so this benefit isn't really, it's not just about education and kids. Like, adults need those moments as well. And having control over the way the world sounds, even for a couple seconds. And especially if you're kind of moving along to the beat a little bit, that's going to have benefits all across the board. So it's the science is definitely proving what I think we've all known for a while. Music is good.
Well, it's wonderful to see more and more evidence come out that proves your own joy.
Yeah. Oh, this isn't bad.
Yeah. See, I told you. There's a reason when I was a teenager, I spent like those hours in my room with music, right? It was
I'm waiting for the research to come out that shows something bad. I mean, there's certainly, career choices for fledgling songwriters could be considered problematic for most people, but that's that's part of my life. I actually originally went to school for music performance and then music production before finding philosophy and sociology, and I ended up going to grad school for that stuff. But at the beginning, I went to school to college. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I loved music. And somebody told me in high school, and they're like, you can go to higher ed for this and you can get a career in music. And I was like, that's silly. What are you talking about? You can't do that. And then something worked out. So, yeah, I think we're seeing across the board now, especially with new tech and new social media, that music really is so fundamental to culture and a really primary way that people express their emotions. And so I think even just everyday expression, the kind of things we do in text and social media posts and phone calls, if we can add a little bit of music to that, it's going to add to human expression in a good way. I believe that.
It makes me imagine a world where we send little sonic emojis instead of a nodding Shiba Inu or something, or a smiling cat, that all of a sudden you get like a pretty little like chord or a little trill that sounds like a happy bird or something like that, to say like, I mean this in a positive way. I'm not like, this isn't a passive aggressive question.
Right. In a major key.
Yeah, exactly. Like, ooh, there was a real suspenseful chord with that text. Not sure not sure where we are here.
No, I love it. And that really, I love the way you just said that, because we just launched this app, Orbicam, it takes our hardware instrument and kind of virtualizes it on a phone screen, and it's a video maker. So you can actually record your life, a few moments, and add a little melody to it or a little beat or something. And we think about it just the same way that you just expressed it. Like, even if it's just three notes, and maybe it's a pleasing tone, or maybe it's excited or whatever, it's going to radically change the expression of what you're sharing with someone. I mean, I think about it like someone, jumping off a cliff into a lake or something, and especially if it's slow-mo, right? But doing that and having this beautiful kind of string section versus like heavy death metal is completely different effect for the audience and what you're trying to say. So
How did you know that I soundtrack my vacation to death metal, Mike?
I do now. So yeah, I think getting smaller in a way. We call it micro music at Artiphon. It's just these little moments that add some spice or some context. I think that's enough for most people to say, oh, I made that. That's cool. I guess I can be musical, which is a big shift.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful way to think about it. So taking a step back from micro music, or putting micro music into a different context, how if all of us are making music in this fun, playful, casual way, or as this way to sort of add another layer of communication, expression, or connection to our digital communications or social media posts, what does that mean for the music business? Well, I think there's this concern, and this does get back to that same sort of 19th century ideal tension, anxiety around the artist. Mm-hmm. Like, once we're all making music, does that really change the way the business works? Will it be more like how, we all use Instagram filters, but that doesn't mean we don't hire a professional photographer for special life events? How do you imagine this unfolding, or what have you heard or seen so far that it gives you some indication how micro music might influence professional music?
Well, so many answers to this.
Sorry, we got some time.
Yeah, good. Okay. There's the legal side, and copyright law, and which evolved along with the the record and publishing industries in order to create and preserve them, which I think we can see in a great way because it created a lot of the culture in the past 150 years or so, but also in a limiting way. It commodified these cultural objects as things to be sold and scarce things. And the fact is, they were scarce. I mean, you either had an instrument or you didn't. You could either record it or you couldn't. You either had a record of that sound or you didn't. And so all these were things that really did cost money and did require these institutions to create them and then manage the distribution. But in so many ways, the whole signal chain I talked about earlier is becoming abundant. It's becoming, in its digital forms, things that we can share. It's not free. I mean, it takes electricity at least, and a lot more. But I think that we need to get beyond thinking of music as a scarce resource. And that is how the traditional recording industry has thought about it. And copyright law still reflects that. And so I think this new world of everyday music making and really the fracturing of albums into songs and songs into snippets and who knows what, I think it is a real challenge to the traditional model, but everyone's catching up. I mean, there's a lot of movement right now in people thinking about what this looks like. Obviously, social media has opened up a lot of new doors and revenue streams for music, but it's gonna look and sound very different. I'm really excited about it because I think it's all about people's ability to express. It's rather than say the value of a traditional music catalog. Is this sound relevant? Is the music that people are making and interacting with relevant to their lives? And that's where the real value is. So I'm all about it.
Awesome. So I know, Mike, that you like to think about future iterations of music tech. And so this is a really interesting time. And I bet it's been firing up a lot of imagination for you and your colleagues at Artiphon. So I'm wondering, we've got all these new technologies that are sort of breaking through, or they feel like they're maybe at the dawn of getting enough mass adoption or enough interesting stuff going on via that technology to really start engaging, in a broader range of society. So we've got things like AR, VR, mixed reality, whatever we want to call it. I mean, it's all reality. It's just what layer do you put on it?
Yeah.
Immersive sound, all sorts of virtual experiences that you can see via screens and maybe even not if we're talking about things like holograms. What do you think about all this? What's most intriguing to you? Just to get a touch sci-fi here, where do you envision all of this going in an ideal world? What do you kind of dream about in the next 5, 10, 50 years?
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of start with the present. A lot of the sort of different realities we talk about right now, when we look at it from a sound and music perspective, I think sound's always been rather virtual and immersive, and so this isn't necessarily as new for music as it might be for more of the visual media and art world, where display technologies have had severe limitations and are really rather new in these forms compared to music that has always been this kind of, ephemeral, immersive experience. And the interactivity of music, I think, is what is drastically changing now. And that's what I'm really focused on, is now that we have these tools that we can in real time let people create and modulate music. What are those new behaviors? And so in some of my academic research, I was really fascinated by the correspondence between technology and technique, and the idea that technologies on their own can't be innovative. They don't do anything. They only do something with an associated technique. And techniques can change over time. We can use hammers for all different kinds of things. But I think when we're looking at new technologies, and thinking about how they can become cultural technologies, it's all about what people actually want to do. So a lot of what I'm thinking about these days is, what are the expectations that people have now that they didn't 10 years ago? I started Artiphon about 10 years ago now. And at the time, I remember our first newspaper article, which already sounds dated, but
Wait, you mean like paper, like from trees?
yeah, fiber.
Crazy.
Yeah, the headline was, the Artiphon Instrument One makes music like the real instruments. And
You created a wonderful
yeah,
simulacrum of an instrument. Congratulations.
yeah, I know. Yeah, and I studied Baudrillard. Yeah, that's my jam. Um, so is kind of a perfect entrance into, okay, a decade ago, there's this major distinction between the real and the virtual, and we all know what real music is and how you really play it. And then there's this other crazy thing over here. What's GarageBand anyway? And now, that's not nearly as much of a tension. We're all living these kind of hybrid lives, and even even the podcast we're doing right now, people are most likely listening while doing other things, real or virtual.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just not as worried about that distinction anymore. But it also means that we don't necessarily know what we want yet. If we are entering this world where all media is available at all times and it's becoming interactive, you can do things with it, you can respond to it, you can duet with it. How do we want to spend our time? What does it mean to be creative or expressive in a world of maybe hyperabundance? And I think we need to find some new ways to kind of channel and design experiences in a sort of Lego way, right? Like Legos aren't just putty where you can make anything. Like they have structure to them and they behave in certain ways. And I think part of the process of design is actually limiting and streamlining those experiences so that there is a result that you can identify as fun and rewarding and cool. And I don't know that we know. Well, we're not going to know what it is until it happens. And so I'm mostly focused on these behaviors and expectations people have around what it means to be musical today. And then I think the future tech is going to respond to that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question about what people will find truly satisfying, as the kids say nowadays. What will kind of be that weird little thing that, feels like, oh, that feels really right. And I can't put my finger on it, but it feels right.
The vibe.
Yeah, the other thing that you made me think about with your thoughts on like what do we want is how layered do we want this to be, right? Like how divided can our attention be even within one sort of sphere of perception? Like do we really want to wear AR glasses all the time so we're constantly getting various data or able to superimpose some other image or sound or video over our what our eyes are perceiving? Like it's a really, really interesting time, and it feels like we're at a bunch of crossroads where we need to look at human sanity maybe as our guidepost in some of this, not in a bad way. I mean, it's always an important question.
But I think the giving control to people in those moments and letting them choose whether to turn things on and off, have silence or noise or whatever they want. I think that's the kind of empowering I'm focused on. And so it's not about finding the one thing that everyone wants to do. It's about building things that people can actually, tailor to themselves, that react to them, that respond dynamically. to your actual life. And that's how you can live with it, right? We don't want to live with robots that don't care about us. But if they do start to care about us, maybe it'll work out.
There's a serious emotional side that I feel is left out of a lot of imagining of hybrid, hybrid sort of man machine type dualities, right? Like, and there's things like, falling in love with an AI or falling in love with a robot, but I think the emotional stuff is going to be a little bit more banal, but
yeah. Well, and we're doing AI stuff because as we're talking about augmentation and all this, that's obviously the way it's going. And yet for us, it's always about that kind of coordination and reciprocity. So rather than just asking an AI, do this for me, and then it spits it out to you. We're more focused on the kind of conversation, the creative conversation that can develop, and so that's where I think it's more than the sum of either, someone being musical and adding to a process, and then the AI is responding with more than that person could have imagined they could do themselves. So they respond in turn by doing more. And then that's how this stuff, it's how it's always worked, even back to the classical composition. You get those communities of composers responding to each other. And that's what created such amazing, super complicated music. I think we'll probably do that again.
Or the basis of just call and response in, music designed for worship or music designed for play or fun. The way you were talking about it, Mike, made me imagine sort of hocketing with AI, right? Like where you're sort of trading notes back and forth and creating a whole that could never exist if there were just one voice in the mix.
Well, that gets to an idea of improv, and even beyond just music, but encouraging people to actually not know what they're going to do next, but set up conditions where no matter what they do, and you said this a few minutes ago, there's not a right or wrong way to do it, but because you did it, it's cool. And that's what happened, and let it be, and then do it again. That's incredibly different than, say, my childhood violin lessons of you're either playing Mozart right or wrong. This is about living in the moment, and it's kind of adding this musical layer to things, but there's not a wrong way to do it.
Great. On that note, I think we should wrap things up. Thank you so much, Mike, for this really engaging and interesting conversation. And thanks so much.
That was super fun. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Tristra.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know you can dig deeper into all our episodes with the show notes at musictectonics.com? While you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference, sign up for our newsletter to get updates, or get the Music Tectonics app for music tech news. Everything we do explores seismic shifts that shake up music and technology the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and find me, Dmitry Vitsa, if you can spell it, on LinkedIn. Bye-bye!
You're listening to Music Tectonics.